Hello again. Alright, today we're going to be talking about avoiding annoyance. 15 things that readers hate. Now, these are some things that I also dislike as well. In fact, most of them are things I dislike as well. But what I tried to do here was I did a ton of research on different surveys and collective articles that said these are things that we find readers hate the most in fiction and that annoy them the most. So, if you want to avoid annoying your reader, let's talk about those things. I also wanted to mention that next Thursday, May 25th, 2023, we are going to be having another Adult Writers Club meeting. I would love to see more of you here. I would love to help with editing. I would love to help talk through things. I would love to have brainstorm if that's what you're looking to do. If you have any questions about these videos, that would be the time to come talk about it. You can get personal one-on-one help from me with anything that you'd like with writing. The next thing that I'm going to mention is that in July, one second, let me find it. Wait, it's on this paper. Alright, July 29th from 10:30 a.m. to 6 o'clock p.m. we are going to be having a writing conference, an all-day writing conference in July. So mark your calendars, July 29th from 10:30 a.m. to 6 p.m. Sorry, we close at 6, so can't be later than 6. We will be having 4 fantastic authors come join us that day. So far, we are going to be having Kayla Rivera, Arlem Hawks, Anne Sutton, and Natalie Brienne. I'm so excited to have them come talk with us and come work with us. They are going to be teaching some fantastic lessons. Kayla's going to be teaching on getting readers invested in your character. Arlem Hawks is going to be talking about finding joy in where you are, so like valuing ourselves as writers regardless of where we are in the publishing journey. Anne Sutton is going to be talking about marketing ideas to help you, whether you're traditional or independently published. Marketing's important. The next thing is Natalie Brienne is going to be talking about emotional roller coasters and how to utilize those in your stories to help keep your reader wanting to read. Then after that, we're going to have an award ceremony for our summer writing contest. Please make sure you grab one of these and enter into our summer writing contest for 2023. They're at the American Fork Library. Come pick them up, please. Then we also will have a signing and talking with the authors from 5:30 to 6 p.m. I'm very much looking forward to it, if you can't tell. So hope to see you all there. All right. So, talking about avoiding annoyance for our readers. First thing that I noticed that popped up several times when I was doing my research on what readers dislike, and I definitely agree with that, is don't use character names that look or sound almost identical. So if they look almost identical, that's annoying. And if they sound almost identical, that can be annoying too, because even if they're spelled differently on the page, if someone is reading it aloud or reading an audiobook or listening to an audiobook, listening to an audiobook is reading. If they're listening to the audiobook, you do not want them to get confused. So you don't want it to have you want to have them be very different. For example, Luke and Samuel, instead of having Derek and Darren. The only difference is one letter in spelling. It's like, and even if you spell it, Darren completely differently, like D-A-R-Y-N or something like that, you're still going to have some readers that are like Derek, Darren, Derek, Darren, Derek, Derek. It's going to get confusing in their head, even if on the page it makes sense. And that's annoying. It bothers readers to feel confused. You never want to confuse your reader. That is the number one way to start annoying them. So just make sure, if you're going to do character names, make sure that they are different and unique. That way your poor reader does not get lost. Alright, next is having a plot twist that's so much of a plot twist that your readers are left completely in the dark. Plot twists are good. And you don't always have to foreshadow your plot twists either. You can have them come into your story and completely blindside your reader. But the thing is, you want to blindside your reader in a positive way. Now, this might sound weird, but there's a difference between blindsiding and having them feel like, oh, duh, that's so cool, and feeling like, what? And the difference is a logic leap. So if there is a leap in logic, say they've been trying to figure out who's been murdering these people this whole time, and it turns out it's the guy who just walked in 2 minutes ago, weird. Like, you should probably foreshadow that. But if you're not going to foreshadow it, it has to make logical sense. For example, I watched a show recently where the son appeared like he was the killer. But the reason why is because he was there trying to keep his mom from going insane and killing people. But of course you assumed it was him because he was the one covered in blood. So that one there makes sense. You're like, oh, you knew he was at his mom's house, that it's not too much of a logic leap. There was no foreshadowing there, but it made sense. You knew he was at his mom's house, but you just assumed it was him because he was covered in blood, but actually it was her. And that makes sense. That flows. The problem is when it feels like you're just going from night to day instead of just flowing into it. If you have any more questions on that, please let me know. This is kind of a rundown very quick. Don't use character or place names that are impossible to pronounce unless you have a pronunciation guide. And make sure if you do the pronunciation guide, don't just make it up. Look up and Google how to do a pronunciation guide properly. And make sure that you have an editor look over your pronunciation guide. With this, it is purely because readers like being able to know how to pronounce things. If they feel confused about how to pronounce things, they're going to probably put the book down just because they're like, I can't understand a word of what this is saying. However, if you have an eloquent and correct pronunciation guide, you're golden. Or if you're able to sound it out, then you're also good. But if you have character or place names that are completely unpronounceable and you have no pronunciation guide, or the pronunciation guide you have is just made up, it's not using real pronunciation terms, that's not good. You're going to have a confused reader and your reader's going to get grumpy and annoyed. I totally forgot about this one, but this is a really good point. They also mentioned if you're going to have a character with a completely unpronounceable name, make sure you give them a nickname. For example, in the movie Atlantis, it's a really old one, but it's good. He goes to Atlantis, right, and meets this girl, and she's like, my name is Kanaka, or something like that. I can't even pronounce it myself. And he's like, can I just call you Kiki? Like, I'm a little confused. Please help me. Nicknames are perfectly acceptable if you want to have unpronounceable names. Just make sure that you only use the nickname, and you don't use the unpronounceable name all the time and then just have the nickname for sake of ease in dialogue. The next one that is super annoying for readers is that when they completely ignore reality just because they want it to look that way. For example, a teacher living in a luxury mansion that she afforded by herself. Unless she is the tutor of the royal family and it's their summer home that they're allowing her to use because she's the tutor of the royal family, there's no way in ever that a teacher's salary is going to be able to afford a mansion. Or if she, found it when it was super run down and they were going to basically bulldoze it, so she got it for almost pennies on the dollar, and she's just been rebuilding it herself because she loves to rebuild mansions in her spare time, or things like that. That is absolutely acceptable. What's not acceptable is when you have no explanation for what's happening. You're just like, she just can't afford this mansion, or she saved up really hard. I'm sorry, any teacher will tell you they do not make enough money to possibly make that work. Ever. You need to have a different explanation for it. Economy is still the economy, and it will always be the economy. It's not going to suddenly change for your main character. The next one is being so invested in your writing that the setting is actually more interesting than the characters. You're so invested in your world building that the world is gorgeous, but your characters are just flat cardboard cutouts in your world. That's kind of annoying. We want to be able to read because the characters and the world are beautiful, not just because the setting is beautiful. If you went to watch a movie and the actors were all really terrible and saying cheesy dialogue, but the setting was gorgeous, it would annoy the heck out of you. So think of it like that. The next one is using the same set of words or phrases over and over. For example, it sounded like a waterfall. Her hair fell like a waterfall. The music floated like mist from a waterfall. that gets really old really quick. If you're doing poetry, that's fine because it's super short. But if you're doing a super long novel and you say like a waterfall almost every page, that's gonna get really old really quick. And even if you don't use it almost every page and you use it like once a chapter or once every other chapter, it's still gonna get old pretty quick. You gotta make sure that you're aware of what you're doing. You don't necessarily have to be paranoid about this. This is for your editor to look out for, but sometimes it can be nice to be aware of the types of words that you use too much. All right, the next one is kind of similar, using said and asked all the time instead of mixing it up. And by mixing it up, I mean using no dialogue tags, so no he said, she said, just straight up dialogue, no listing on the back, or an action tag. That's when you say like, I absolutely hate broccoli. Darla poked at her broccoli. So that's an action tag because you're not saying said, you're not saying asked, you're not saying giggled, you're just saying she poked at her broccoli. That makes it so it's an action that is on the end saying who's talking. All right, that is perfectly acceptable, but if you use said and asked all the time, your reader's going to get a little bit annoyed because again, it's that redundancy, that repetitiveness. All right, next is changing your point of view to a different character for a single chapter and then never going back to that character's viewpoint ever again. Or bringing up a character that had no relevance before, having them be super important, and then having them promptly vanish after it. And again, never appear again. You want characters that show up and matter. And even if they're background characters, for example, Neville Longbottom. We never have a chapter from his point of view, but he's still important and he regularly shows up. He doesn't just, hi, show up in the first one and then never appear again. He's a regular character. We like having a regular cast. We don't like having just random people who are like, hello, and then disappear forever. The next point on this is changing viewpoints without explanation. So this kind of goes along with it, and especially in first person. If you're doing first person, you should want to stick with first person, always. That is my opinion. Some people disagree with that, but that is my opinion. If you're doing first person, either stick with that person or stick with a limited cast. Don't go crazy. And if you switch your viewpoint regularly. Don't just randomly switch it. Don't be like, oh, now it's her chapter, now it's his chapter, now it's her chapter, now it's his chapter, and do it. If you do it out of pattern like that, that's okay. Or if you do it in a way that makes sense with telling the story, that's okay. But if you randomly, again, switch to a character that has no relevance and then come back, we're wondering why that even mattered. The reader's kind of like annoyed. They're like, well, that was nothing. When character, moved right along. The next one is when characters do something for the plot but realistically they never would. So for example, they fall in love with someone who has been obviously treating them bad the whole book. That doesn't make any sense, and you shouldn't force that upon your readers or your characters. Or for example, if they go from loving ball gowns and tea parties to I want to stab everyone in the room. Whoa, big character change. Now if you explain how that character change happened, perfectly acceptable. But if there's no explanation and all of a sudden you're just like, I need her to be a psycho killer, you gotta have some sort of foreshadowing, or you gotta have some sort of in-post explanation that helps fill in that gap for readers. If you just change them with no explanation, it gets frustrating for the reader. All right, the next one is when the story doesn't fit the stated genre. So for example, a fantasy novel like Lord of the Rings, going along with hobbits and elves and whatnot, then all of a sudden spaceships appear in the last few chapters and aliens start blowing everything up. What? That really annoys readers. You want to make sure that you are marketing your book in such a way that everything that's in the novel is dictated. So if you're going to have aliens in it, make sure you advertise it as a fantasy sci-fi. Don't advertise it as just a fantasy and then boom, be like, they're going to love this plot twist. Most fantasy readers will hate that plot twist. Telling you right now, it's going to bother them. But if you tell them in advance, something more sinister and galactic might be at work here, then they're like, okay, so it's fantasy but with a sci-fi twist. Then they feel adjusted. The next one is when the viewpoint changes with no warning or setup in the middle of the chapter or paragraph, and then goes back to the other character with no warning again. Now, this is basically just when you switch viewpoints erratically, and this is something that your editor should catch, but not always, and it can be really annoying for your reader to have a limited viewpoint of, let's say, Caroline, and Caroline's going along, totally enjoying her viewpoint, and then all of a sudden it randomly changes to Jimmy's viewpoint for a paragraph, and then it goes back to Caroline for the rest of the chapter. No, that doesn't make any sense. Just keep it in Caroline's point of view. Or at least indicate it with little stars or something to section it off if you really have to have that point of view right then. All right, the next one is when formatting is inconsistent and choppy. It is so distracting for a reader, and it's very easy for a reader to lose their place and get confused when the formatting is choppy. Now, I know a lot of people are like, oh, but I tried really hard with my formatting. Just pay a formatter or get an editor who knows formatting. That is going to really help cement your story the way that it's supposed to be. It's going to help feel less distracting. The whole thing about formatting and why it's so uniform in the traditional publishing industry is because it's so the words on the page are highlighted and not distracted by all of this gobbledygook of different tabs and different spacing and different size fonts. No. Unless you're writing a children's book, that's generally not acceptable. And even in children's books, they generally have a uniform way of doing it. So if you're independently publishing, make sure you get a formatter or an editor who knows formatting. The next one is stuffing political, philosophical, and moral themes that don't fit the story. Now, some of this might be controversial for you, but for example, The Lion King 2. If you've never seen it and you have Disney Plus, I think it's still on Disney Plus, the whole thing was basically a giant racial statement. And yes, I am absolutely all for not being racist. I am not a racist, and I hate people who are racist. Amen. But when your whole story is just one big moral or one big philosophical or one big political battle, or like the Republicans are bad or Democrats are bad or whatever, it gets really obnoxious really quick, and it doesn't feel like a real story. You should have a whole complete story with underlying tones of philosophy and moral themes and possible political themes, but it should not be your only forced theme. All right, next, when a character is killed off for no reason, or a character is devastated over a character that we've never met before, and you don't explain it in post or previously. Now, if you explain previously, this is his girlfriend, he's finally going to see her again after 3 long years of being separated, and then she dies, okay, that makes sense. Or this is her boyfriend, and you don't know that until later, but then she explains that it's her boyfriend, and she's really sad, and it explains everything, that makes sense. But if you don't explain it at all, and the character just dies for no reason, or their death is completely unjustified, it gets really annoying to the reader because they want their death to feel justified. Even if that's not the way it is in real life, we want to feel like the death is justified. All right, the last and final one is when the plot rushes through the important points or drags at points that aren't important to the plot. Now, this is more of an editing thing, don't worry about it right now, but when you finish your novel, make sure to go back and readdress. Is this important to the plot? If it is, flesh it out. If it's not, cut it out. And make sure that you just keep that pacing there. All right, thank you so much, and I hope to see you next week at Adult Writers Club. Bye.